And we're live. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of Divesoft TV's series Close Calls. This is the second episode for the multiple series of close calls that we're going to be talking about. This week, I've got guests that are on the other side of the world. That is guests Alex Santos and David Strike. We are pre-recording this episode, so this was recorded a few days ago, but nonetheless, it is the entire episode, and it's set live for you guys. I hope you guys enjoy. Thanks. Today we're kind of experimenting with everything new, so we're going to be doing it through Zoom. So today I have Mr. David Strike and Mr. Alex Santos. I'm very excited for you guys to be joining us. I'm here in Florida. Tell me where are you guys located?
I'm based in Sydney, in Australia.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and I'm based
we're currently in a lockdown at the moment, but I'm originally from the UK, but have lived in Australia for the past 48 years. So I am Australian now.
I live in Makati, Philippines. We're right at the capital. Well, it's Metro Manila, which is basically the center of business in the Philippines.
Wonderful. Well, it's so glad that you guys could join us. So today's kind of episode is going to be very much focused on kind of commercial diving. Both of these gentlemen's close calls occurred during kind of more commercial diving operations. And my background in commercial diving is very, very minimal. We worked in a big pool. But we were doing a lot of kind of commercial operations that could vary from like they wanted to test a piece of oil equipment to we wanted to create training, a particular training environment in order to test out certain equipment. And so with the pool, we could have cameras and stuff. But, with commercial diving comes its own hazards of basically you are very, very task loaded. You're focused on a task and you're working such a variety of environments. Do you guys? What are y'all's opinions on those kind of hazards that come with with commercial diving?
I don't know that I'm altogether qualified to really give an accurate answer on that. I mean, I got it very much into commercial diving through absolute greed, more than anything.
It's a good motivator.
Yeah, it was a great motivator. I'd left the Navy, and the North Sea oil rigs had North Sea oil exploration had just started to kick off, and enormous sort of money to be made for divers, and they were absolutely crying out for divers to go and work and receive these huge sums of money. So I was only too happy to put my hand up and toddle off to the North Sea. I must admit, it was at a time when, very much like the old Wild West, and you often hear those days sort of referred to as very similar to the Wild West. This was at the very beginning of the 1970s. There were absolutely no controls over diving. Anyone that put their hand up would more or less be accepted. Wow. I was fortunate in that I had come from the Royal Navy, and the company that I joined was, in the main, of the 8 people, 7 of us were ex-military.
Okay.
And generally it was thought that former military divers had a better chance of survival. And bearing in mind the mortality rate in the North Sea in this period of time was absolutely horrendous. Insurance actuaries at the time had declared it the most dangerous occupation in the world. And this was reflected, of course, in the money that we received.
Wow. Yeah, it's an underwater gold rush.
Yes.
And kind of Mr. Santos, what's your opinion on kind of like commercial diving and the kind of hazards that kind of come with it?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Joe, just call me Alex. Well, our environment is certainly far from the recreational or technical environment. We have to deal with a lot of structures. It can be anything from as simple as inspecting piles or just videographing the underneath of a vessel, or it can be something as difficult as moving trash racks around, 2-tonner trash racks, and having to put them into specific slots. The job search is so varied in hazard levels. Some are relatively safe, but I can say that for the most part, there are quite a number of hazards that we need to account for. And for us to do that, for us to do it safely, or for the job to be acceptable, we have to go through a procedure which we call our HIRAC. It's the hazard and risk assessment procedure, and we look at all the possible hazards or accident potentials that can take place, and then we go through the corrective measures, and then we give it a score until we are able to come up with a score that says it is possible and safe enough for us to conduct. If the score is high, like if you get a score of about 3 or 4, then the job is considered unacceptable to perform.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that sounds like a very kind of a clear-cut system of like either a go or no go versus where you can kind of have a little bit of temptation to be like, oh, well, we can kind of handle this. We can, kind of push through it. And, but it actually with that clear-cut system, it kind of really categorizes things like, oh, look, nope, we can't do it. So, doesn't leave a lot of room for interpretation, which probably a good thing, and definitely in terms of risk management. So.
Yes, definitely. I mean, commercial diving is considered hazardous to begin with, but despite the hazards, we still go through a zero casualty scenario. We try and have zero accidents during the operations, because a simple accident can halt the entire operation, and it's really bad for the company that has hired us, because everything's going to have to be shut down. So it's unacceptable. And so therefore we calculate all the risks and just go ahead when we understand that everything is acceptable.
Right. It's one of those sort of things that gradually around the world you're seeing a lot of governments or quasi-government organizations stepping in and actually controlling diving, laying down rules, regulations, procedures, and protocols that have actually sort of made it now, by and large, a fairly sort of safe occupation. Because there's such strict controls in place. Certainly in the UK, they had the or have now the health and safety executive, which sort of sets down how divers should be trained. The Norwegian Petroleum Directorate, and there's a number of these organisations now set up that are IMCA, the big national or international organization sort of sets procedures in place. So it's becoming a far safer occupation than it once was, when it was just open slather.
Yeah, and I mean that's great to hear and stuff, and especially how things are getting safer. So, well, that's a great segue into kind of leading us into your story, David, of like you were saying, like the underwater gold rush, basically how were times then, and how is your close call story, if you can kind of dive into
that. Yes, indeed. It was very early 1970s, and as I say, I'd left the Navy. I decided, or I'd like to cash in on the money being offered to divers on the North Sea oil and gas platforms. And I joined a company, a consortium of 8 of us. 7 were ex-military people. We had the contract for one of the large oil companies to maintain their offshore platforms. This was in the southern part of the North Sea. The work,
rough area.
it was quite sort of varied, but we were largely involved with placing anti-scouring devices on the seafloor, big carpets around the legs of the fixed platforms to stop sand erosion, because the currents through the North Sea, and particularly in that southern area approaching the channel, were very fierce, and the sandbanks would change very, very sort of quickly. So fairly obviously the amount of money invested in these platforms, they didn't want them suddenly toppling over. So that was mainly our task. In terms of my particular close call, it's actually in two parts. At any one time, there would always be 5 of us on the platform, and we would always dive at slack water. And generally, it would be 3 divers would go in first, assess the job, start the work. They would come up, do a quick briefing for the other 2 who would go down and finish off that particular task during that slack water period, or close to slack water. So on this particular occasion, I was in the second stick, 2 of us waiting and watching while 3 divers were lowered in a basket down to the water surface. They then left the basket, swam down to the seafloor, carried out their particular task. And on this occasion, one of the divers immediately came to the surface, was obviously showing signs of distress and being swept away from the platform, and unable to reach the mermaid line that trailed from the basket that was still there in the water waiting for their return. And myself and my buddy were standing on the upper deck of the platform just watching. We were already dressed in our wetsuits. We were wearing 6.5 mil wetsuits with a normal.
Kind of as safety divers, or just kind of standby?
Well, no, we were just watching, ready to go in ourselves when the previous 3 surfaced. And obviously seeing this guy in distress, I picked up weight belt, fins and mast, rushed down to the lower level catwalk, which is about 3 meters above the surface of the water, donned the fins, donned the weight belt, put the mask on, hopped in the water and swam furiously to carry out this rescue of my mate that was being swept away. After a little while, I decided to stop swimming, surface, and see exactly where I was in relation to the projected victim. And I realized that I'd swum straight past him.
Oh,
and he had managed to get back and grab the mermaid line and haul himself back to the basket while I was being swept away, which was not a good sort of situation to be in. But fortunately, a lot of the fishing trawlers in that area of the North Sea were pressed into service as standby boats, and their task was to pick up survivors should any of the platforms collapse, or to keep other shipping out of the area. So I was picked up by one of these trawlers, the Margaret Christina, operating out of Lowestoft. And the formerly fishing crew were there. They were happy, just floating around. It was a Sunday. They dragged me aboard, cold and wet, asked me what I'd like. Fairly obviously, a mug of hot tea. How do you take your tea? And I just said, black without sugar. I was handed a huge hot mug of tea, drank that. Would I like another? Yes. And they then announced, because it was Sunday, they were about to sit down for their Sunday lunch. And would I care to join them?
Oh, that's a good boat to be grabbed by.
I said, well, I'd really like to get back to the platform. And they said, yeah, but we can do that after lunch. So I joined them for lunch. And after lunch, they radioed the platform and said, look, what we're going to do is to sail in very, very close. You can lower a personnel basket on the crane, and we'll tie a lifeline around the diver, and he can hop in the water, swim back to the basket, and be hauled back to safety. So there I was, standing on the gunwale of the trawler with the lifeline tied around my waist. And I said to the crew member hanging on to the other end, whatever you do, do not let go of that line. I do not wish to be washed away again. So we steamed in fairly close to the basket. I jumped over the side and swam towards the little basket that was going to carry me to safety. And just as my fingers touched it, the Margaret Christina decided to pull away from the platform rather than collide with it. The rope tautened and I was dragged, spluttering underwater because the crew member, true to my commands, had failed to let go of his end of the rope and just dragged me back underwater. So I surfaced again, screaming, and screaming. He let go of the rope and I eventually made it back to the basket and was hauled back on board. So I was quite sort of happy. It was just one of life's little experiences. About 3 months later, we were working in another part of the North Sea on another platform. They built next to it, a production platform was being constructed. And the production platform, so you have a drill platform that's bringing up the gas or oil, and next to it is a production platform, which ultimately the product would be pumped ashore on a pipeline that they'd lay. And this was in about maximum depth, about 160 feet. Now, I should explain this, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, this took place 50 years ago. So the equipment that we were wearing, we had a choice of equipment depending on the tasks. In the main, we would use twin cylinders. There was no such thing as BCDs. We'd have a submersible pressure gauge. That was pretty much the full extent of our equipment. The regulators that we used were mostly upstream regulators, unlike most modern ones, which are downstream and ensure a free flow of air if necessary, if anything goes wrong. On this particular occasion, our task was to go down to the bottom, follow a line down to the bottom of the newly erected production platform and carry out a preliminary survey of the lower struts. Our task was just merely sketching rough mud maps on a slate. And two of us hopped in, swam down. It was very, very dark on the bottom there. We carried lights with us. And as we got to the bottom, all of a sudden my regulator went pop, and
it's always a good
nothing
feeling.
was there. Now, the guy that I was with was also former Navy, and I thought, well, what we'll do is link arms and buddy breathe, following the struts of the platform back to the line that would carry us back to the production platform on the surface.
Mm-hmm.
And I shone the light in my face to indicate that I had a problem. My buddy looked at me. I grabbed the regulator out of his mouth and took a deep suck of air.
At least you get
He grabbed it back and immediately disappeared, which sort of my options then were fairly sort of limited. We'd only been down a very short while. I immediately started heading for the surface, and some sort of form of training had kicked in, and I kept the airway open all the way up to the surface, praying, of course, and swearing that I would be in future a good sort of person. Now, sadly, by the time I reached the surface, I didn't even have the foresight to ditch the weight belt or the tanks until I reached the surface. And on the surface, I ditched the weight belt. I couldn't even manage the tank. I was suffering, I guess, from an excess of adrenaline.
Right.
And
Yeah, I can imagine. Mhm.
looking around, the tide had started to slowly turn, and I was being washed away from the production platform. And I had no idea where my buddy was.
A little while ago.
Fortunately, there was a supply boat alongside the main drill platform, and the skipper on the supply boat had been standing on the bridge of his vessel looking for pods of dolphins. And all of a sudden, he saw this head break the surface. And he radioed to the oil rig, asking if there were people in the water. And they said that there was. And they sent then a message to a standby boat to look for divers, i.e. me. And I was just close to exhaustion, pedaling away, didn't even have the strength or the gumption to shed the twins.
Right. You're just focused on one thing and just being at the surface.
Yeah. And eventually this trawler came steaming past, stopped. I was so exhausted, they had to put a net into the water to try and lift me out. And they removed the cylinders, and I just rolled over and lay face down in the scuppers, being violently ill. Not through any decompression problems, just I think an excess of adrenaline and obviously fear.
Right. It's almost
and
a
after a very short space of time, I heard a voice, a crew member. They'd obviously picked up my buddy as well, who had surfaced some distance away. And I heard this voice just saying, "Oh, mate, you must be freezing. What would you like? A mug of tea, a hot drink?" And I heard my buddy then just say, "Oh, yeah, I'll have a mug of tea, please." And they said, "What about your mate?" And at that point, I rolled over and the crewman said, "Oh, bless my soul, it's you, Strike, isn't it? It's black tea, no sugar." So I was back once more on board the Margaret Christina.
Oh, no. So they're like, "Oh, we know this one."
They took us back to the main platform. We were lifted up onto the main deck, where we had a deck decompression chamber, and thrown in there just for observation and safety. So that was my sort of tale of woe. There was no sort of decompression problems. We planned to be down no longer than 15 minutes, which would have given us about, we used the US Navy tables, would have given us about 5 minutes of decompression had we done the full 15 minutes. So, we were fairly sort of safe there. But yes, so of all the things that went wrong, heaps of them. Had we planned anything? Not really, no. We never planned for the what ifs of diving. We knew the task that we had to do, and we went through that in minute sort of detail. But in terms of diving safety, diving procedures, rescue, no, we sort of let that go by the by. So it was a little bit of a wake-up call.
Right. Wow. It's like you said, it was a wake-up call to kind of tell you, like, okay, maybe we need to readdress things. We need to do things differently. We need to take a step back. A very like what I would call a textbook kind of close call, where you have a lesson. And so
yeah, and I was very fortunate. I mean, I've done a couple of free ascents since, not quite from those same depths, but on each occasion, I've been very, very fortunate not to have suffered any embolisms.
Right. And so, yeah, I know at NASA, whenever we categorized a close call, it was basically a close call would be categorized as an incident that did not result in any property damage or any loss of life, but it was something that could create an opportunity to create an operational change. And so kind of to learn from that. So
I must admit, the coming out of the chamber, looking for my erstwhile buddy, he had been put onto a chopper and flown ashore immediately.
Wow.
And left the organization. So
yeah, wow. Yeah, quite a difference. And so
yeah.
Well, great. Well, thank you very much for sharing that. That was you did a very good job of kind of painting and describing everything about it. And so it's amazing, especially when you talk about the mortalities and the fatalities that did occur during those days and during that kind of rush for the work. So
yeah, I think in that particular year, there was over 20 sort of deaths in the North Sea. So it was
wow. Yeah,
it was interesting to become nearly one of them.
I'm glad. It's fantastic that you're able to just share a story where you had a close call and you learned from it. So well, awesome. So Alex, would you kind of like to tell us a little bit about kind of your close call and kind of the background of how you had that incident that you had that was able to kind of teach you to kind of like a wake-up call, like close call. So let's see. Oh, I might be muted. There we go.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I'd be happy to share it. Well, this particular close call, the one that I used for the book, obviously it was just one of many others. But this one is the particular highlight because it's got the combination of errors and a comedy of errors as well, which is why I chose it. And to give you a little bit of background, just to set the stage before the actual dive, is we work at this power plant as a regular contractor. We're contracted on a yearly basis to do inspections and work. The work entails many forms, and one of them is the inspection of the tunnel, which we do twice a year. Sorry, once every other year. We do it biannually.
Okay.
The dam and the power plant itself is more than 30 years old. So as you can imagine, it's gone through quite a bit of wear and tear. So one of the things that we have to ensure is that the tunnel is in good shape. If the tunnel gives, then there could be a catastrophic collapse of parts of the dam. So we have to ensure that the tunnel is in perfect condition. So we frequently dive the tunnel. Sometimes, most of the time, the repairs that we conduct would be patching eroded surfaces because there's a lot of concrete. The tunnel is made of concrete liners, but the flooring is not of a concrete liner, but it's mostly just laid up concrete. And so there's quite a bit of erosion that happens on the floor, which we frequently patch up. So we actually do concrete patching underwater, which to some people might seem bizarre, not knowing that you can actually do that underwater. So just short to say that we've become quite familiar with this tunnel. We dive it quite often, and obviously the first time we did dive, we had to lay a line to be sure that we knew where we were going.
It's almost
After
like a cave.
couple of yeah, pretty much like a cave. And the other thing about this tunnel, there are no distinguishing features. So once you hit the tunnel, everything looks the same.
Right.
So it's difficult to know exactly where you are inside the tunnel because everything is the same. But over the years and after many dives of inside the tunnel, we've become quite familiar with a few markings in the tunnel.
It can't be much though. Yeah, exactly.
No.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I know that little bump.
Yeah. Yeah, but I have memorized a few markings in the tunnel, but at that time, everything just looked the same. But there are a couple of lines on the floor. If you can imagine the tunnel being round mostly, and then suddenly the floor being flat. So you've got a couple of these lines where the concrete liner meets the floor, and these lines serve as our directional markers. So we
And
follow
how
the
big
lines.
is the tunnel?
The tunnel's about 4 to 5 meters in diameter.
Okay. Oh, so
Yeah,
it,
yeah,
it's 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 quite big.
yeah. And given the visibility inside the tunnel, you can actually spin around inside if you're floating midway in the inside the tunnel. You can spin around without knowing it.
Mm.
So what we normally do is we follow these lines or these junctions from the entrance, from the elbow, to get to wherever we're going. Like let's say the gate. In this particular case, during our close call, we had to get to the gate to inspect why the gate wasn't closing well enough.
Mm.
There was always a bit of flow being detected at the powerhouse, and they wanted us to figure out why there was water. There was a little bit of water flowing through. So our objective was to look for wherever that seepage was occurring. So on that particular night, we had to work at night because the plant would generate power during the day, and our window to dive was just anywhere between like 1 to 6 a.m.
Okay. No
Yeah, so
natural light anywhere. So it really is a lot like a cave. It's a cave with no features.
yeah, it's like diving in a cave at night. So you can imagine that the mood to begin with was pretty eerie.
Right.
So um, then we did our dive the way we always did because we've planned this dive many times, and we were prepared to do another dive just to inspect the gate. So we already knew. Well, we went through the what if scenarios just the same, and we rehearsed the dive as we always do before the dive. And so without thinking about it so much because we've done it many times, we went ahead and entered the the tunnel. Um, I actually have a drawing here which I'd like to share. Would you like me to go ahead and do that?
Yeah, go ahead, try and share it.
Yeah, just to visualize.
Yeah, and
So
for those of you guys watching, the pictures in the book are fascinating, and they're very helpful for really kind of painting the picture of this story. And so,
yeah, but unfortunately I can't share because screen sharing is disabled on your end.
okay, I wonder if there was a way that I could enable it, but there we
Well,
go.
if not, yeah. All right, here we go. Great. Can you see that?
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah. So just for visualization purposes, this is the intake tower, and there's water all around it. And it being in a lake, the water elevation could be anywhere from here to maybe higher. During the dry season, the water level goes below the surface of the tower. But at the time when we were working, it was quite high, and our entry point would be above this platform. So we weave through this platform trying to avoid some of these structures like this round bulkhead, and simply descend down to this portion of the structure which is we call the bell mouth. This is called the bell mouth.
Mm-hmm.
It creates a sort of like a Venturi effect, so that the velocity of the water going into this tube is made even faster.
Wow.
Yeah, but of course, during the time, everything was locked down except for that minor seepage. So we had to descend all the way down here, and
Now, what kind of
and
depth is this about?
the bell mouth would probably be at this point around 30 to 35 meters.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, maybe sorry, I think even more because during that season, the lake elevation was pretty high. So I'd say about 40 to 45 meters. Then you've got this shaft that goes down to this elbow here. And once you're down into the tunnel, then this goes straight to the gate. It's about a 300-meter swim to the gate and another 300 meters to the turbine.
Wow, good. Quite a long swim at depth as well. So
Yeah, yeah. And at the time, just for simplicity, we opted to use open circuit.
oh,
Yeah,
don't say
which
on air. So
no, certainly not. No, certainly not. So, yeah, we were diving Trimix, of course,
Mhm.
and we had a travel gas of air. We were using air to travel down to our switch level, and then we would proceed with Trimix. Now, uh, this particular dive was a bit strange because they hadn't used turbines for maybe a couple of days. So
Mhm.
there was no generation for a couple of days. And I remember that there was quite a bit of runoff in the days leading up to the dive because there was quite a bit of rain.
Mm.
So the river runoff had created quite a bit of a mess of the visibility. There
Right,
was a
right.
lot of turbidity in the water, and after a couple of days, the turbidity had began to settle to the bottom of the shaft. Um, the first half of the shaft was pretty clear, but once we had passed the bell mouth, the visibility changed very drastically,
Mm.
and that for us was pretty much new. It was the first time for us to see that kind of poor visibility, which was no big deal because we're quite used to diving in poor vis. It's
Right.
just we found it strange for it to be bad at this particular dive because we've never seen it bad ever in the previous dives. So, poor visibility doesn't matter. We're used to it. Let's just keep on going.
Mhm.
So we went ahead until we couldn't see each other very much, and we finally hit the elbow because I could feel my fin scraping that elbow.
Oh, you can feel it hitting the sand, the slope of it.
Yeah, and I have to be honest. I wasn't able uh, to not use my fins for a little bit. I think I was kicking up quite a bit of it
Mm.
because I realized that I was descending like a rock
Yeah.
because at some point I couldn't see, there was no reference. So I realized I was descending pretty heavily. And when my fins began touching the slope, I think I maybe stirred up a little bit of silk trying to uh, to halt my descent. I was
Right.
trying to arrest my fall, but to no avail. I just slid it down the slope. At this point, I couldn't see my buddy, but eventually I felt him beside me, and we stopped once we hit the bottom of the elbow, and so I could feel him. And at that point, I said, I think this is a terrible time for us to proceed. So
It's
the only
hard to
thing
do inspections when you can't see, huh?
That's right, exactly. Yeah. So, as any responsible diver would do, we would have to abort. That was the safest thing to do was, abort and do it another time when the visibility is better. So, I remember that we could see just a little bit of each other, very faintly, and we gave each other the thumbs up, out,
Right.
and thinking that the shaft was just above our heads because we had just landed at the bottom, thinking that the shaft was just above our heads, we began to ascend. But again, sorry, let me just share that image for you once again. So if you see the slope here, we actually skidded down to this part of the tunnel.
Oh, wow. Much farther over than you thought you were.
Yeah, yeah. And we thought, well, I thought that we were just right beneath the shaft, but we were actually inside the tunnel for a little bit. So at that point, we decided, okay, let's go up, and we started, we inflated our BCs, so began to fin out of there, and once we cleared that cloud of silt, uh, I remember hitting my head on the ceiling,
Oh, that's
and because I could see a little bit, there was a little bit of window to see each other. I remember seeing my buddy's head, pressed
oh
sideways
my
to the
God.
ceiling this way. His ear was like pressed to the ceiling, and
That's an
so
uh-oh moment.
yeah, I was like, what happened? We were supposed to be going up, so where are we? But it was still funny at this point. To me, I knew we were not far from the shaft, so it was just a matter of going back to the shaft and heading out. And so I looked up to the ceiling and I could see our bubbles traveling a certain way. The
Hmm.
bubbles were traveling on an incline, and intuitively, you would think that the bubbles were traveling outside
Right.
shaft, but it was exactly the opposite. The tunnel had an incline that was heading into the turbine.
Wow.
Yeah. So, thinking that we were heading the right way, we said, okay, let's follow our bubbles. And so we began swimming, not knowing that we were swimming inside into the tunnel. Now, I know that there was a bit of fear that had set in because I wasn't paying attention to how long it was taking us to get to the shaft. It
Hmm.
shouldn't have taken us no more than a minute to get back to the shaft. But we were swimming and following those bubbles, and our focus was just at those bubbles
Yeah,
because
it's that perceptual narrowing. You're just seeing the one thing
exactly
there. Hmm.
analytical narrowing had already set in, and we were just focused on one thing: follow the bubbles out. But we were going in, and it later it dawned upon me that, hey, it's taken us too much time to head out, and we must be going the wrong way. Until I finally heard something that was very familiar, because above the tunnel, there were workers hammering away. They were working on the turbines, and they were hammering away. And I remember going in that direction before and hearing those hammering sounds. So they were pounding and stuff. So I knew we had gone the wrong way. So I signaled to my buddy and said, we're going the wrong way. Let's head back the other way. And so he says, okay, let's head back. So I started
That's
swimming
good.
back. Yeah. So now I knew we were going out the right way. And about a few minutes swimming that way, I suddenly felt this strong tug on one of my fins, on my fin. It was like it's jerking. It was really a strong jerk on my fin, and I thought, oh no, this can't be right.
Right,
I
right.
thought, yeah, my immediate thoughts were that he had either ran out of air or he was in trouble. But apparently, he still had gas. I mean, I had a lot of gas. I
Hmm.
managed to see a little bit of his gauge without having to alert him to it. And he had gas, but he was going through his gas rather quickly. And then he motions to me, let's go this way, inside. He was thinking that this was the right way to go, that the exit was in the opposite direction.
Oh,
And I'm
that's when
like,
you start questioning things, you start arguing things. That's it's such a delicate situation.
exactly. And now at 90 meters and not knowing where we were inside the tunnel, that was just no place for us to engage in an argument, right?
You got to make a decision.
Now, being the more experienced diver, and luckily being the boss, I said, let's just go this way. This way is out,
Hmm.
emphatically, but without showing any signs of stress. Just to keep him calm, I said, let's go out. And so I quickly turned around just so I could have him follow me, and I swam at a slightly faster pace because I was afraid he might grab my fin again.
Right. And, I read that in kind of your story that you just kind of, you know what, we're going to go. and I'm not gonna argue with you. This is the way to go. You're gonna follow me. But you swam kind of outside of his reach, so he had to follow you.
Yeah, he had to follow me.
And
I remember
that's a good move. Yeah.
yeah. As you remember, like in tech diving, you always know that where there's gas,
Right.
you right.
Exactly.
So I knew that if he was running low, then he would have to follow me wherever I go. So he definitely did.
Yeah.
Yeah. But as we were swimming out, I knew he was behind me because I could see his light just panning left and right. Um, but the biggest fear that I had was if he had run out of gas or if he had reached my fin again and ensued on this argument, and suddenly he would have to grab my primary if he loses gas. Like now we're sharing gas and wanting to go opposite ways. That would have been the worst case scenario because if I had to donate my primary, now we're now diving as one.
Right.
And if
And
he
you don't
wants
know
to
where
go
he's
the other
up.
way, then the only thing that would happen is that Greg would be severed from each other. So I just made sure to swim as fast as I could without leaving him behind until we finally made it past that elbow. And the minute I saw that elbow, I was like, oh, thank you, thank you. We've made it, we've made it. So we went through the elbow, we were fine, we were ascending. And when I looked at him, actually the story didn't end like the book had ended. When we got together up the shaft, I saw that he was already on his travel gas. He had already used up all his gas in his twins.
Wow.
So he made that conscious effort to switch to his travel gas. And I'm certain that he was really knocked out of his wits because he was using air at 90 meters for
Oh
quite a
my
few
God.
minutes.
Yeah. So he got onto it and
So there was quite a bit of drama still that occurred going up through the shaft because at some point he had run through his air. So we had to share gas at some point. So I was sharing gas with him. I managed to give him my air. We switched tanks, gave him my air. And when he went through that, we had to share my Trimix.
wow.
We actually had to accelerate our decompression, our ascent schedule.
Wow.
I remember bumping off a few minutes every stop, like maybe a couple of minutes at 12, maybe 3 minutes at 9. Just for example, we had to bump off a few minutes each stop just to get to our O2.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So
And we just made it to the O2 when my tank was almost dry. Yeah. So yeah, once we had our O2, it was attached to these huge medical oxygen cylinders. We hang it for our in-water recompression station as well. So we did our decompression there. We went back down to 9 meters and did a few minutes at 9. Then we finished off our decompression and added a few more minutes at 4.5 just for safety.
right. For kind of the rushing to get out of depth. So
Yeah.
wow.
By that time, we were quite relaxed, and we were making fun of each other, giving each other some funny hand signals, the bird.
Right. You're like, wow.
So
That's an incredible, a very close call indeed. And and awesome story. And yeah, it's, and so kind of real quick, kind of what were some of the lessons that came from that?
well, the very first lesson I learned from that experience was we were given plans. We were given drawings of the tunnel. We should have gone through the drawings first of all. So that would have solved a lot of the problems immediately. I mean, if we had looked at the drawings, then we wouldn't have been in that situation. Even without the lines, even without the nylon lines, we would have known to make it out of the tunnel properly. The second thing I learned was even if you don't plan to use lines inside the tunnel,
Mm-hmm.
at least lay a line from the bell mouth down to the shaft and into the slope. And you can actually clip off your travel mix to that line.
Right. You could use it as a tool.
Yeah. So I mean, it's not a lot of effort and not a lot of time to lay that line from the bell mouth down to the slope, and we could leave everything there and just follow the lines going in. So if we simply had that line, then we would have made it out without any issue.
Right. It's
Yeah.
Eduardo was talking about that last episode that he learned. He's like, just go lay a line. It's not that much work to pull out a reel, tie in, and lay a line, and it's worth it.
Definitely. Yeah,
Well,
it was one of those things that I know this, I don't need it. Yeah, just silly. It was just overconfidence.
wow. It's complacency.
Yes,
I can imagine, especially doing a very routine dive in a routine section in a routine area. Oh, we've done this procedures. We just do it the same as we do it all the time. So
it is that old saying, complacency kills.
exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Alex and David, for sharing your stories. I encourage everyone to really to read the stories in the book, and it's so awesome that we're able to kind of hear it from you guys, hear the stories, and like kind of see you guys paint the picture of it. And so it's really amazing to see how a lot of close calls in commercial diving really led to a lot more safety parameters and better safety records today. And so it's hairy diving. And so it's a little bit of luck and a little bit of skill. So, and so thank you guys so much for tuning in and joining us this week. So, and Alex and David, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you, Joe.
Thank you very much. And we will see you guys for our next episode of Close Calls and part of the Divesoft TV series. So thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.